Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drum McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at thechangeleader.com. And now, here's your host, Drum McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our guest today is Tony Huffman, CEO of Perdea Education. Tony has a long history in ed tech, starting with Audible.com, and following Audible, he spent 10 years as an SVP in the online post-secondary education industry, culminating in the creation of Test Drive College, a program that allowed students to gauge their readiness to enter an online program by taking a free credit-bearing online course transferable to partner institutions. Tony created Perdea Education to provide better solutions for students and universities alike. There are two parts to this. First, GetEducated.com, a directory of accredited U.S. distance education programs that has helped over 40 million prospective students research educational opportunities while increasing institutions' national visibility and driving online student enrollments. And second, Emma, a patent-pending mobile enrollment solution that addresses the shifting demographics and communication preferences of Millennial and Gen Z students. Tony joins us today to talk about the changing face of enrollment and what higher ed institutions can do to improve their enrollment pipeline. Tony, welcome to the program.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, and I want to thank you publicly for your sponsorship of this podcast series. It's been very helpful, and we've gotten a lot of great comments from the shows that you sponsored, so thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. We're going to talk about the transformation of higher education, especially the online. It has been Mr. Toad's wild ride over the past 18 months since COVID hit. Previous guest, Mike Goldstein, who is the managing director at Titan Partners Center for Higher Education Transformation, called it punctuated equilibrium. And that is a academic fancy term from systems saying things go steady state, then they go really fast for a while, and they go steady state again. And we've been in that really fast area. Many of the changes are being driven by COVID. They're driven by the enrollment cliff that's coming up, but we're seeing a changing face of post-secondary enrollment. And of course, that's right in your wheelhouse with Perdea Education.
Yeah, certainly the demographics have changed of, who makes an online student these days. 25 years ago, it was a completely different demographic than it is today. And, the millennials today are pushing 40, if not already over 40. And that represents most of the folks that are involved in online learning today. So drastically different than when I first got in the industry.
Yeah, of course. And, the internet, which, made all these things possible, came into effect, 20, 30 years ago, really, as we know it now. Up to that point, it was correspondence courses.
Yeah, that transition, I believe, took place in the late 90s is when, I'd say we went from correspondence to the first online programs. Some could have been a little bit earlier than that, but I think that's when it first kind of broke into, if you want to call it, the mainstream.
Yeah, it's amazing to look back at all these little data points along the way and the acceleration when everything shut down for COVID. Everybody had to go online or completely shut it down. Now, there are online and then there's online. And of course, using Zoom or another platform to just lecture isn't really what we talk about online. But when we go into enrollment, these changing demographics are huge. I mean, the enrollment cliff, which is coming up, we've had declining enrollment here for undergraduates, especially during the pandemic. Graduate has increased, but with the enrollment cliff, there's a different kind of demand, and that's coming from the adult students, correct?
Right. Yeah. So There's really two different types of factors at play. There's, short-term factors, and there's longer-term kind of directional changes. And, if we look at the shorter term, and this is mostly at the adult learner level, education is countercyclical to the economy. As demand from adult students is waning with the recovering job market, this is a shorter-term kind of multi-year pendulum. It's shifted back and forth a number of times in the 20 years that I've been in the industry. But, as things currently stand, we appear to be headed into a few years of lowered student demand. Looking at the longer term trends, as you had just mentioned, it's been well documented, for years that we're hurtling towards the enrollment cliff for traditional high school students enrolling for the first time. Another developing trend over the last 20 years, and really COVID helped shine a new spotlight on it, is that online education is increasing in acceptance and popularity. And yet another is that the supply of online programs is increasing. And it's made a dramatic rise over the last few years. Our online education directory, geteducated.com, has been cataloging the number of truly online programs offered by accredited post-secondary institutions in the U.S. for over 20 years. And there were roughly 14,000 of those programs cataloged as of January 2018. And that number has increased nearly 100% to 28,000 in January of this year. And we've since added another 2,000 programs in the first 4 months of 2021. So now we're up to roughly 30,000. Based on that growth curve, we expect the total number of online degree programs will top 60,000 by 2024. So there is going to be a lot of competition for a static or shrinking pool of students. I think even if we look down the road for when the economy does slow down a little bit, that and people are back in market, that it's still not going to mean that we're back at full enrollment.
And I think that's going to be a challenge, especially at the undergraduate level. At the graduate level, I think we're going to continue to see some of the things that we've seen during the pandemic and even before, people going back to school because they need a degree. So that's your degree completion. They're going back to school for a graduate degree because that will get them either a new job or more money. And, those three basic reasons. The economy and workers are changing. They want higher salaries. And there's a shortage of workers out there. I'm kind of wondering, and I know this is a little bit off the script, but I'm wondering if this doesn't create more of a need for higher education, because if employers want to attract good employees, they're going to have to pay up more benefits. Maybe one of those is education.
Yeah, it certainly seems like, and this is another thing that seems countercyclical to the economy. When it gets really tough to hire, you have employers kind of rolling out tuition reimbursement plans and really kind of promoting that. And then in cycles, where there's a lot more workers that are interested in jobs and there are jobs, that's one of the things that they tend to pull back on. But it is a good point. As we stand now, where there is kind of a shortage of workers, I think you will see, and are already starting to see, a number of businesses, promoting their employment reimbursement plans. I did see a meme the other day. It's widely known, Starbucks is working with Arizona State, and there was one, where they had a job fair and they were promoting that quite heavily.
And that makes perfect sense, because you're seeing more progressive schools like Arizona State who are working with businesses to provide the education. And in many cases, it's, okay, we'll give you the education, but you owe us X number of years here at the company so that we can get something out of it, which, makes sense. You should have a quid pro quo with that.
Right.
But having said that, it's also changing the face of enrollment. Whereas instead of institutions going for the students, the traditional undergraduates, if you really want to be able to survive, you've got to go after more graduate students. Yeah. And if people are working, you've got to have online programs similar to what you support.
Yeah. So, you're right. As we look forward, how are institutions going to survive or even possibly, get ahead? First is identify the adult student as a target. The available high school graduates are not going to be coming back anytime soon. Next, you need to really create or improve your online offerings. And that's not only degree programs, but shorter certificate type professional development programs as well. And realizing that enrolling a working adult is vastly different than a high school student, and how you go about recruiting a high school student can't be more different than how you need to recruit an adult student. Being able to reach that adult student with information, how they want it and when they want it, often means, on their mobile devices. Mm-hmm. So schools are really going to need to kind of retool their recruiting and admission functions for the adult learner. Indeed, the entire institution needs to evolve, and that mind shift needs to permeate, all sectors within the university.
Well, as we were talking before, and this is stuff that I've read and experienced as well, the enrollment processes that most institutions are using nowadays date back 25 years.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That's a very different generation. And, talking with millennials, with Gen Z, it's all about the phone, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's interesting that the demographics of someone that may have been interested in enrolling, say, 25 years ago is vastly different from the demographics that, today's online student is of. It's amazing the changes. And, the schools that have been kind of cutting edge, if you will, in terms of, recruiting and enrolling the online student, they've really got this process down, and it's very heavily dependent upon call centers. And, that worked. They get an inquiry or a student that says, I'm interested, and it's very call center driven. They're calling that person multiple times a day. And, maybe that worked 25 years ago, but that effectiveness of that is waning. And a lot of it is driven by, the millennial who's now in market for online, don't want to talk on their phone, but they do everything else on their phone. And so kind of realizing how that shift has occurred is going to be important, as schools continue to try and attract that market.
Well, that's exactly what you do there at Perdea, is you work to help higher ed institutions change their enrollment processes for the 21st century.
Yeah, we're very focused on the long and the short-term trends, and we do have a couple solutions to help institutions grow their online enrollments. First, we're able to provide risk-free incremental students that an institution wouldn't otherwise have. And we do that by building out our Emma mobile enrollment solution and really working as an extension of the university to enroll students that are sourced from our online education directory, Get Educated. And so for those that may not know, Emma is a patent-pending mobile enrollment solution that utilizes AI that a student downloads to their mobile device, and it becomes the hub for all communication. And this serves the student a variety of different ways, but leads to a fully packaged student ready for an admissions decision. And as we had just discussed, institutions that are well adapt have been using practices that are now 25 years old. And Emma is a fresh step forward working with an interested student that leads to an enrollment. And it's been proven to outperform the best practices that are currently employed while being less expensive.
Yeah. I think you just did a study along these lines, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. So we looked at, we have a number of institutions that, it's over 100 institutions that work with us in advertising on our geteducated.com website. Most of them provide back enrollment data. And so we're able to look at the inquiry to enrollment percentages. Because we can rule out advertising source, since it's all coming from one advertising source, you can start to narrow in on other factors at play. And there are some other things, cost of the program, brand of the institution, but it really boils down to how well that institution is communicating with that prospective student and helping them through to enrollment. And so we looked at all of the data that had been supplied back for 2020. We took the leading institution in terms of inquiry to enrollment rates, and we said, okay, that's the target. Let's see how our mobile enrollment management process stacks up to that. And we're working with an institution in Mississippi and had been working with them all of 2020. We're also advertising on Get Educated and taking those interested students through Emma and onto an enrollment. And we outperformed the industry-leading university by 26% in terms of our inquiry to enrollment rates, and also did it in a much more cost-effective way using the Emma tool than what that institution was using. They're very much schooled in that old 25-year-old model. They do it effectively, but we beat them by 26%. So it definitely proves that this mobile enrollment solution is the way to go.
That's huge. Those are big numbers. I mean, for every 100 students, you're getting 26 more than that. I mean, how much in tuition is that?
Well, 26% more. Yeah, it's a percentage. Yeah, any little percentage helps. If you can also lower your cost while increasing the output of inquiry to enrollment, that's important as well. Mm-hmm. So that's the second thing actually that we can provide. We can license Emma to an institution so that they can have a complete system designed to speak and enroll an adult student in the modality that they prefer. The institution would provide their own advertising, but they have a system that understands and communicates with a student that student may not be completely adept at serving. So they can just feed their advertising into that tool and benefit from a higher yield on inquiry to enrollment rates.
Well, it sounds like you've solved a huge conundrum with this, that you've got millennials and Gen Z who don't want to talk on their phone, but they want to do everything else. They need education. They want to go back to school for selected programs. You've been able to find a way to bridge their dislike of talking on the telephone.
Right. I'd love to think that we're geniuses, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's, there's a lot of other industries that are very mobile focused and making use of technology that's available today. And, we just kind of looked around and said, well, why isn't anyone doing this in the education space? And so we built it. It didn't seem all that kind of crazy to us. It just seemed like a logical use of current technology to solve a growing problem, and that was connecting with these millennials who were, looking to get their first or an advanced degree.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes perfect sense, and of course, you and I have known each other now for 4 years, somewhere in there.
Number of years. Yeah,
I've seen your organization grow. I've seen you doing just fabulous things. But let's go back to the enrollment conundrum, because most institutions are struggling with enrollment, going back 25-year-old process. Mm-hmm. And you've been able to solve, a good deal of that process, but there still is creating the value. And students aren't going to enroll unless they see the value in the institution. Most institutions don't do good marketing. They really don't understand what their target student looks like and where to find them.
Yeah. Well, I think that really boils down to who have these institutions been enrolling for the past 150 years, and how is that landscape changing, and are the schools themselves going to be able to change with it, or just throw in the towel and potentially go out of business at some point, in the next 50 years. If there are three things that presidents should be thinking about, it's that this industry is evolving at a speed that we've not seen before. I mean, certainly the last year or so has kind of taught us that with COVID. Just look how much things have changed. And, I don't know that it's necessarily going to fall back to the status quo. I think things are going to continue to change and actually accelerate from that point forward. And, school really needs to kind of prepare and reorganize from the top down. And that's driven by the president, and it really must be bought into by everyone, or it's just not going to be that effective. I mean, especially if you're concentrating on the adult learner, the most dangerous position that a university can find itself in is believing that they fully understand the adult market and have everything buttoned up and under control. That's more dangerous than believing that you know nothing about the adult space, as the former will lead to lost time and valuable resources learning the hard way. The latter means that the institution can quickly get on with learning and not make the mistakes. And so I think that's really, if there's one thing takeaway, it's that one. You've got to focus the resources on the adult student. You've got to create the programs that allow the adult student to earn or finish their undergraduate degree if they haven't already. and a graduate student, to earn a degree or the training needed to advance in or retool their career. That retooling, with everybody changing jobs now, I think, what is it, Drum, on average 5 years, often going from one industry to another, there is a market there to kind of help that adult learner make that transition. And lastly, you just need to become world-class in recruiting and enrolling the non-traditional online student by, focusing on how they want to receive information and being able to support it. And that today is on people's mobile phones.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we had one guest on not so long ago, Frank Rojas from Los Angeles Pacific University, who put the entire program, not the enrollment piece, but the entire program, the degree, on the mobile phone. They did a human design process.
Interesting.
They brought in the students. What do you want?
Yep.
And they have done that. They've converted it. Their enrollment's gone up because of it. Now, I would love to see them start with something like Emma, to where everything, the enrollment all the way to walking on the stage, can be virtual.
Yeah, that would be neat. And that's very interesting to hear that we already have schools that are going completely mobile for instruction and everything. That's really bleeding edge.
Yes, it is. And I think personally that is going to be the way of the future. Is you can do your entire degree on your phone, on your tablet, whatever it is. You don't have to go to a bookstore to buy your books. You can just download them, and your books are, free use, whatever, or you pay a small rental fee for them. I mean, everything is going to change, and COVID has just accelerated those changes.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's kind of, interesting to point out is that, I see that learning being device agnostic, right? So somebody can, on their way home, maybe listen to a lecture on their phone, but as soon as they get out of the car, they go into their home office and they can then pick up where they left off on their computer, maybe make dinner, help the kids with homework, and, as they're going to bed at night, kind of finish that particular lecture or that part of the program on their tablet. So being able to kind of seamlessly move from one device to another is going to be, helpful for those students as well.
Oh, and that's totally in line with their lifestyle as it is right now. I mean, folks are coming back to work. Some of them are going to be able to work flexible, work at home, back in the office, whatever. But everybody is just going to be so busy, and they are busy already. You carve out 15 minutes as you're waiting for an appointment or whatever, and you can do your lecture. If you've got it on your phone, if you've got it on your tablet, that's what folks want now.
Yeah, absolutely. And just being able to offer, I think the key word that you said there is the flexibility. Being able to offer that flexibility is going to be very helpful. Enrolling a student, Drum, is really pointless if they don't graduate, right? So you need to make that learning experience for them something that they enjoy and can get through that fits their life.
Absolutely. So, well, Tony, you've already done our 3 takeaways. you did that,
Yeah.
You've got to, institutions need to prepare for and deal with the enrollment cliff that's coming. Everything is changing. Reorganization. The one thing we didn't really talk about is the role of the board in doing this. And of course, your board should be the drivers of change with this. It shouldn't necessarily be the president.
Right.
A good friend of mine, Jerry Zernacki, who just recently stepped down as the chair of the board of the National University System, was involved with growing the university through acquisition. And one of the things that he strongly believes is if you have a strong board who can drive change, this is critical for making the changes in the institution.
Yeah, I absolutely couldn't agree more. If you don't have everyone rowing in the same direction, you're just going in circles.
I like that.
Well, I mean, think about it. Institutions are going to struggle with this one because, there's so much, the processes for teaching, the processes for, enrolling, admissions, everything within that university is built on, the previous decade or the previous century. And so as they think about moving outside of that paradigm, there's going to be undercurrents that are going to be working against them. And that's going to be, folks who maybe just have a couple more years left before they retire or, don't particularly want to change. And we've seen it, in our work with institutions. And even if there is strong leadership from the top, if it's not fully bought into by everyone within the organization, it's not as effective. And you can make some gains, but if you don't have everyone really kind of rowing in the same direction and bought into the vision is set out by the board, by the president, and maybe the president gives that address to everyone at the institution. But, unless everyone's bought in, it's just not going to be as effective as it needs to be. And that's probably the biggest challenge that the schools are going to face is getting everyone on board with this is the direction, this is where things are headed. It's not going to be like it has always been, and you need to be okay with that, and you need to be helping us all move in that direction. Those are hard lessons to learn, but that's probably the biggest challenge that institutions are going to face.
As we tell our clients about resistance to change, it really comes from three things. They don't get it, they don't like it, or they don't like you. It really boils down to those three things. And
that's
sometimes
true.
It's all three.
Oh, goodness.
Well, Tony, this has been wonderful. What's next for you? What's next for Perdea? What are you guys doing and where are you going?
I'd mentioned earlier, we're just really kind of focused on helping institutions grow their online enrollments. So we've got our Emma product, as we'd mentioned, but we also have kind of a combined product that just provides risk-free student enrollments where we're doing promotion and recruiting on our Get Educated website, working on the school's behalf with a white labeled version of Emma on their behalf and just feeding them students that they can admit into the institution. Being able to provide and continue to make our Emma tool better. And every week we're adding new design elements, and we learn from the previous enrollment cycles and improve things moving forward. And institutions can tap into that. They can white label that technology and use that and let us continue to develop it and improve it to where they don't necessarily need to be experts in how to enroll an adult student. They've got a tool that does that for them. That's really going to be, our future, and what we're focused on right now is being able to help schools increase their online enrollments.
And the single biggest cost of any higher ed institution is people. And if you can repurpose some of your online enrollment staff to doing other things, providing the student support that's necessary, whether it be in financial aid, mental health, whatever that is, you're going to not only be able to enroll more students, but you'll be able to retain those students. And it's like you said, enrolling is great. You got to graduate them.
Yeah. Being able to use technology where technology makes sense and allow the human element more time to develop those relationships and really kind of help those students all the way up to enrollment. But then from enrollment on is going to be very critical.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, Tony, I want to thank you for being on the show. We've been talking about doing this for a long period of time, and I'm really glad we had the opportunity to do so.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening this week, and a special thank you to this week's special guest, Tony Huffman, president of Perdea Education, and for his sharing with us his perspectives on EdTech and how institutions can improve their enrollment pipeline with tools such as Emma. I also want to give a special shout out to Tony and Perdea for their sponsorship of this podcast. Visit PerdeaEducation.com to learn how they can help grow your online student enrollment through a performance-based model with no risk or long-term contracts to your institution. Our next guest is Dr. Mark Roosevelt, president of St. John's University. St. John's is the third oldest university in the U.S., and they've done something that many other institutions have only talked about, a successful tuition reset. Mark will be joining us to talk about how they came to this decision and how they've made it work. And by work, I mean both increasing applications and enrollment and staying revenue positive.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drum McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.